Let's talk about the different types of primary elections. Direct primary, voters decide party nominations by voting for the candidates. In an indirect primary, voters choose convention delegates, then the delegates choose the party's candidate in the general election. That's the system used in presidential elections. A proportional primary, voters elect delegates to the national convention who are already pledged to certain candidates. In a closed primary, only declared members of the party can vote in that primary. Voters state their affiliation and then vote within that chosen party. Open primary, voters can decide on either party in the privacy of the voting booth, but once they choose it, they're restricted to the list of that party's candidates. A blanket primary, individuals can vote for more than one party. That's been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. A runoff primary is held when no candidate receives an absolute majority in a primary. Second primary is then conducted between the top two contenders. In a top two primary, such as California, all candidates appear on the same ballot regardless of party, and the two receiving the most votes move to the general election. Party candidate also could be selected through the caucus or convention system. Each state determines the date for its primary or caucus. The individual who wins an early contest, such as Iowa or New Hampshire, is considered to be the front runner. And because earlier primaries seem to have greater influence, many states are scheduling their primaries as early as possible. That's called front loading. This has led to the popularity of Super Tuesdays when multiple states hold primaries on the same day. To prevent campaigns from starting earlier and earlier, both parties prohibited states from holding primaries or caucuses before February 5th, 2008. But Florida and Michigan ignored that rule, so the parties had to decide whether the state's delegations would be penalized at the national convention. But in 2008, so many states ran their races on February 5th that instead of getting more attention, they got less. Since 1832, presidential candidates have been nominated at conventions. To seat the delegates, a credentials committee approves all the delegates. It's usually not controversial, but it can be if rival groups claim to be the official party for a state, district, or county. And though the highlight of the four-day convention is the nomination of the presidential candidate, most delegates are committed well in advance. The Electoral College was set forth in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, as framers were worried about elections being decided by the, quote, excitable masses, unquote. So voters in presidential elections are not truly choosing a candidate, but electors who then vote for that party's candidate. The total of a state's representatives and senators is used to set the number of its electors. But currently, there are a total of 538 electors, so a candidate must win at least 270 electoral votes to be elected president. The candidate that receives the plurality of the votes cast wins all the electoral votes from the state. So if you win the most votes in your state, you get all of those electoral votes. And it's possible and actually quite common for a presidential candidate to be elected without a majority of the popular vote, even more likely when a strong third-party candidate is running. Another problem with the Electoral College is a candidate being elected when the opposition has received a plurality of the popular vote. And that's happened 4 times, most recently in the 2000 election between Al Gore and George W. Bush. All states have used a secret ballot. It's distributed and tabulated by government officials. That's called the Australian ballot. Other ways elections are conducted, the office block ballot or Massachusetts ballot. That ballot groups candidates together under the title of the office, thus discouraging straight ticket voting. The party column ballot or the Indiana ballot lists the candidates in columns arranged by political parties. Therefore, that encourages straight ticket voting. and voting by mail, states are increasingly using mail ballots to make it easier for people to vote and to increase turnout. Oregon is the only state in which all votes cast are by mail. Voting fraud is regularly suspected but seldom proved. Fraud was more of a problem in the 1800s than in modern elections. However, in some states, the potential may be high due to phony registrations and absentee ballots. Many states are requiring proof of identity before voters can cast their ballots via voter identification laws. Indiana has passed the toughest such law, and that's really been criticized as punishing poor and minority voters who are least likely to have proper ID. Also, outdated or malfunctioning equipment and questionable practices have raised concerns about inaccuracy in tabulating votes. Voter turnout in 2010, about 41% of the eligible population turned out to vote. When voter turnout is low in a presidential election year, the winner of the nation's highest office could be chosen based on the opinions of only 1/4 of eligible voters. Here's some of the effects of low voter turnout. There are actually two schools of thought. One school of thought, low voter turnout, that's a threat to democracy. Too few people decide an election. It signals apathy about our political system. But another school of thought, people are satisfied with the status quo, and representative democracy is the result, even if a small percentage of people vote. Voting age population is the number of people old enough to vote currently living in the country. The vote eligible population is the number of people who have the right to vote. And since the founding of our nation, various restrictions have been imposed on the voting process. In colonial times, the majority of American adults were prevented from voting due to rules allowing only certain white male property owners to vote. In 1870, African Americans were extended the right to vote through the 15th Amendment, though Southern white racism created obstacles to the true participation until the 1960s. In 1920, women were granted the right to vote with the 19th Amendment, and in 1971, younger people were granted the right to vote with the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age to 18. Voting requires registration, one of the eligibility requirements. In 1993, Congress passed a motor voter bill, which allows for registration when applying for driver's license or by mail. Some of the factors commonly influencing voters include party identification, perception of the candidates and issues, and socioeconomic and demographic factors. Except for race, the most important factor influencing voters is party identification or party affiliation, which is shaped by family members, peers, generational effects, and the media. And making a difference in voting. One vote does make a difference, as demonstrated in very close elections in a number of places in the country. Local elections are often decided by a small number of votes. In nearly every state, registration is the first step. To register, you have to be a citizen of the United States, a resident of the state, and at least 18 years old as of election day. Registration laws vary from state to state based on such factors as residency requirements and time limits, and in most states you must register a certain number of days ahead of an election. That concludes the lecture for this chapter. Please check the course documents section under this chapter for the remainder of the assignments.